to the NatRefs Show, a fortnightly global podcast on sustainable cooling and heating technologies, brought to you by Shecco and supported by Teco. My name's Andrew Williams, and I'll be hosting today's show from Brussels, Belgium. I'm the European editor of Shecco's industry-leading websites r744.com, hydrocarbons21.com, and ammonia21.com. I'm also the editor of Accelerate Europe, Accelerate Australia and New Zealand, and Accelerate Asia magazines. I'm joined today by our North America editor Michael Garry, our Asia Pacific reporter Devin Yoshimoto, and my colleague from the market development team Dario Belluomini. This week, we'll discuss the raising by the Environmental Protection Agency in the United States of the hydrocarbon charge limit on home fridges, and the use of natural refrigerants by IGA Market Central supermarket in Australia. We'll also look ahead to the Atmosphere Asia Conference on natural refrigerants to be held in Singapore on 4th of September. Let's start in the United States. Michael, give us the lowdown on the EPA story.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Yes, this is a really significant story. One of the first really positive environmental stories coming out of the EPA in a while. What happened was that the Environmental Protection Agency published a final rule raising the charge limit for hydrocarbons in domestic refrigerators, home refrigerators and freezers, to 150 grams from 57 grams. And they did this through the adoption of a UL standard, which the UL body changed its standard to 150 grams last year, setting the stage for the EPA to follow suit. And this rule takes effect on September 7th. So this applies to three hydrocarbons, R600A, isobutane, R290 propane, and R441A, which is a blend. And it applies specifically to new household refrigerators, freezers, and combination refrigerator freezers. It's under the EPA's SNAP program, their significant new alternatives policy program, which is what they use to regulate refrigerants. And this is really significant, Andrew, because the U.S. was the only market in the world which had a 57-gram limit rather than a 150-gram limit. And this was generally seen as an impediment to the adoption of hydrocarbon refrigeration, home refrigeration in the U.S. domestic market, which is a huge market. U.S. consumers purchase about 12 million household refrigerators and freezers annually, but they use R134A, which is high GWP HFC, of course. Elsewhere in the world, thanks to the efforts of Greenpeace, 150 grams has been the charge limit quite some time in domestic refrigerators, and that has, in particular, using isobutane. And of course, those fridges have gained a dominant market share as an energy-efficient, environmentally friendly alternative to traditional 134A systems. So, we finally are catching up with the rest of the world, the EPA recognizing that, this would help the U.S. economy. Certainly, the Association of Home Appliance Manufacturers has been pushing for this change for some time. When the EPA made this announcement, their spokesperson, Kevin Messner, said that the association was very pleased with this action to update its regulations. And these regulations, he points out, reflect the most recent safety standards. So just because it's in a higher charge, it's still only a little over 5 ounces. It's still quite safe.
We could say that this move has been a long time coming in the United States. You mentioned that other parts of the world, like Europe, have had higher charge limit for quite some time, and this has allowed hydrocarbon fridges to move into the market massively. How quickly do you expect hydrocarbon fridges then to make greater inroads into the US domestic fridge market once this rule has taken effect?
I think it should be fairly quick, actually, because according to Mr. Messner, domestic refrigerator manufacturers have already invested close to $100 million in gearing up to make conventional home refrigerators with the isobutane at 150 grams. So, they've been gearing up to do this, believing that the charge limit would go up as it finally has. And but now that they have the certainty that it's now at 150 grams, they can move forward to make the final investment that they need to make. But they've been primed for this, ready to go. And it should be a fairly short period of time before these fridges enter the market. Now, of course, 57 grams, they have been able to make smaller units, so it's not completely new to the U.S. market. But the conventional large type refrigerators that people typically have in their homes, they have not been able to make with 57 grams of isobutane. So now they can do it, and it's U.S. being a massive market. This will have a pronounced impact, I think, on the phase out of HFCs and the phase in of natural refrigerants, in particular isobutane. So it's really good news. I'm looking forward to buying my first refrigerator with hydrocarbons.
Right, well, yes, and then, we can expect that the US market can move quite quickly then, sort of alongside Europe in terms of massive adopters of these fridges. I'm a proud owner of a hydrocarbon-based fridge at home in Brussels, like many of my fellow Europeans, so let's see how quickly this moves in the US. Thanks, Michael. Now, on to Australia. We have just published the winter edition of our Accelerate Australia and New Zealand magazine, and the cover story of this edition focuses on IGA Market Central, and specifically on Petar Lujic. He's CEO of a company called the Cayman Group, which is a business involved in developing supermarkets, liquor outlets, hotel accommodation, and other types of property. And he had 25 years of experience previously in different segments of the retail industry before establishing the Cayman Group in 2012. And recently he decided to enter Australia's independent retail sector, opening a supermarket called IGA Market Central at Wentworth Point in Western Sydney in November 2017. IGA stands for Independent Grocers of Australia, and it's a chain of supermarkets in Australia where the individual IGA stores are independently owned. And so Lujic owns the IGA store at Wentworth Point. And so as an independent retailer in a nascent market for natural refrigerant HVAC&R systems, his decision to adopt a CO2 transcritical system for his supermarket is instructive and inspiring to others who may be thinking of going down this route. I think what's interesting about Petar Lujic as a character is that he's thoroughly experienced in the retail and the property development industry, but at the outset of his work on this supermarket was less familiar with the HVAC&R sector and refrigeration technology. And so basically on his own, starting from scratch, he was researching the state of the HVAC&R market, the legislative situation in terms of the HFC phase down taking place in Australia, and came to the conclusion following his research that natural refrigerants were the way to go.
Yeah, so how did he educate himself on natural refrigerants?
So starting from the point of view of a food retailer and kind of a business's bottom line, he was looking at operating costs and came to the conclusion that the refrigeration system is traditionally the largest portion of a food retailer's operating costs. And then he was looking at how can I reduce those operating costs while investing in a future-proof system which won't be subject to the HFC phase down currently taking place in Australia. Now, by his own admission, he had little technical knowledge of refrigeration systems. But talking to colleagues in the property development sector and meeting people from the industry, he learned more about the phase down that was taking place and that certain types of refrigerant gas as commonly used in supermarkets were going to be phased out. And he decided he didn't want to expose his business to this risk of costly equipment replacement in the near future. And looking at this particular store and the climate in Western Sydney, etc., it became clear to him that there was a business case for selecting CO2 transcritical here in terms of the efficiency gains and future-proofing his store from these legislative changes, and that's the way he decided to go. So, having taken that decision, it was a case of finding the right partner. Because he's a busy person, he can only dedicate limited resources himself to the implementation and maintenance of these such a big new technology project. So he chose a refrigeration contracting firm called AJ Baker and Sons, based in Perth, to run the project for him, and that's where the journey began. And as I said, the store opened in November 2017, and the CO2 transcritical rack serves the refrigeration and freezing needs of the whole of the trading area in the store. I would encourage our listeners to check out the rest of the magazine. That's available on the Accelerate website now, and it also features reporting from this year's ARBS trade show in Sydney and the Atmosphere Australia Conference on Natural Refrigerants held at that same time. Another Atmosphere conference is coming up, Atmosphere Asia in Singapore on 4th of September. Over to Dario, who will speak to Asia Pacific reporter Devin about that event.
Thanks, Andrew, and I'm here today with shecco's Asia-Pacific reporter Devin Yoshimoto in our Tokyo office. And Devin, can you tell us about the upcoming Atmosphere Asia conference that we are holding in Singapore next September?
Sure, yeah. So the Atmosphere Asia conference is coming up very soon, in about 2 weeks. This year is the 5th annual event, and it's going to be on September 4th. It's going to be in Singapore at the Suntec Convention Center. And the event is one day directly before Mostra Convegno Expo Comfort Asia. We have a really interesting program this year, especially because we're holding it in Singapore. When we're talking about natural refrigerants in Southeast Asia, of course, we're talking about a market that's not as developed as Europe or the United States or other places, even like Japan and Australia. But it's one of the main reasons why we're holding the event there this year, is because even though it seems like there might not be much happening, there actually is a lot happening right now, and it's a really good time to get in on the ground floor of what's happening. It's an established manufacturing base, so they have a capability to manufacture natural refrigerant systems, actually refrigeration systems in general. We also see right now in Southeast Asia, a lot of the governments are looking with respect to the HFC phase down that they see happening globally, and we have a lot of delegates from several different countries in Southeast Asia, like Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand. We have a lot of government representatives. We have some of the biggest technology suppliers coming to the event.
Yeah, indeed. And I understand that we have a really interesting lineup of end users indeed this year for our 5th event, Atmo Asia. Can you give us some more details about the end users that will attend the event of this year?
Some of the end users that we have coming this year are representing some of the biggest industries in Southeast Asia right now. We have end user from Kiat Ananda Cold Storage, which is one of the largest cold storage operators in Indonesia. They're going to be talking about their use of ammonia CO2 systems for their cold store facilities. We're going to have M-Clean Technologies, which is actually a Singapore-based company that does precision cleaning for the electronics industry. And they're going to be talking about their use of a CO2 heat pump to replace their old fossil fuel electric resistance boilers. We also have a company from Indonesia, one of the largest pharmaceutical companies from Indonesia, called Fapras, talking about their installation of a hydrocarbon chiller to replace their old 134A chillers that provide refrigeration and air conditioning needs for their pharmaceutical company. And how it's really saved them a lot of money on their energy costs. And then we also have representatives from one of the biggest industries in this region is the hotel industry. So we have representatives from Fairmont, Singapore, Swiss Hotel, the Stamford, and also the Hilton coming to speak on the end user panel this year. So really a good representation of the biggest opportunities for implementing natural refrigerant technology in Southeast Asia right now.
Thanks, Devin. It was very interesting overview of the event. And for the convenience of our listeners, let's just remind the date. It will be the 4th of September in Singapore, so only one day before Mostra Convegno Expo Comfort Asia. So thanks again, Devin.
Thanks, Dario. Thanks, Devin. And thanks, Michael. That brings this week's podcast to a close. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to tune in next time for another great NatRef show.